The topic of exhibit design and master planning is a fascinating subject. It's a very broad subject, lots of technical details required. Some zoos do it quite well, others not so well. One zoological collection that is known for having a very effective master plan is the Alice Springs Desert Park. It's one of the nicest collections in the country, and it has had a disciplined narrative since the beginning. And so I'm joined today by Gary Fry. Gary was the curator of the Alice Springs Desert Park and then director of the Alice Springs Desert Park. And so he brings together a wealth of experience with respect to how the master plan process was undertaken by that organization. It's great to have you talk to our students at Charles Sturt University, Gary.
Thank you, Kevin.
Gary, if you could maybe start by explaining a little about the desert park itself. How did it start?
The Desert Park's a biopark, so it's a combination of zoo, botanic gardens and cultural centre, but above and beyond everything else, it's a tourism facility. And the Desert Park came about because some of the people within Alice Springs had a dream of telling the story of the desert and why it is that the desert's important to them, why they enjoy living within the desert. Desert is seen often as a pejorative term, but deserts are great places, and they wanted to work out how best to tell that story, and so that story was told as the tourism facility through the Desert Park.
Fascinating journey. So what kind of stakeholders were involved to sort of help develop the concept?
There were a huge number. So it was the Northern Territory Government initiative, completely funded by the government, but locally run, really. And so there's a whole bunch of people from CSIRO, scientists there, that had this dream of telling stories of the deserts and why they're important to them as a place of research. Aranda people, the Aboriginal people within Alice Springs, were a major stakeholder, and certainly when you look at the people that were initially involved, there's as many Aranda Aboriginal folk as there are non-Aboriginal folk on that initial those initial documents, initial discussions, and indeed that was the case all the way through its not only development and design, but also its construction and implementation.
So the storytelling that emanates from this kind of disciplined, holistic approach to master planning, when we're looking at equality for the geology, plants and animals, landscape, culture, that's quite unique in Australia. So how successful was it?
It was really successful, Kevin. So the mantra that we had was habitat-based, story-driven. And because of the fabulous work that all of those pioneers, that those designers and developers had put in, because of the work that they'd put in from the outset, meant that we had a master plan that we were able to work from. That became our strategic and business plan through not only the implementation of the Desert Park, but also its operation and consolidation over years. So I've worked in a number of zoos across the country. It's the only one I've worked in which the master plan, which didn't die or didn't stop being used once the building had ceased. In fact, it was still our guiding document some 15 years down the track.
So the story-driven nature of this experience that people go on when they arrive. I know, for example, that you have headsets with the story of the park and the animals, plants, geology, all the features sort of built into that. That's a massive investment, isn't it? I think is that unique in Australia? Is there any other collections that are doing it with an expectation for each visitor that the story is preeminent for your experience?
Not any collection that I've seen, not any living collection that I've seen, animal or plant. I think there's been some, I've certainly seen some static collections, some museum and art galleries have done those sorts of things. So often in an art gallery, they might bring in a collection that has nothing to do with anything other than, say, Picasso's Blue Period. Okay, and so they are it's very driven, story-driven period. It's a very story-driven event. But I've not seen it in operation across the totality of the operation of any facility. And so we're habitat-based and story-driven, and so I like to say that the desert around Alice Springs was our story, and then the habitats we told stories about, the chapters, was a riverine system, a sandplain system, and a woodland system. And within each of those systems, each of those chapters, we had botanical, zoological, and cultural and geological elements. We didn't separate one from the other. They were intertwined. And so the plant story became as important as the animal story, which was as important as the rock story. You couldn't extricate any one element of those stories without the whole lot falling down. So they were all inextricably intertwined throughout.
Fascinating story about the evolution of the desert park. I recommend to any of you who are doing zoo tours to head out that way and check it out. Gary, thanks very much for talking to us about Alice Springs Desert Park today.
Thank you, Kevin.